Previously, in part 1 of Maisha Kazini Conversations with Babu Ayindo.
Every politician knows they can go and insult everybody the way they want, use all the tribal, quote unquote, stereotypes. And you know what they do? Their tactic is very simple. They apologize. When they are called out, they apologize. But you know what? The message has already been passed. Or they know that in our structure and system, there is an institution called NCIC, the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, right? They know very well they're going to be called there. Somebody will interview them. Nobody will prosecute. So there is a system and a structure that enables these kinds of behaviors from politicians. Therefore, you make violence almost inevitable.
Yeah.
And especially, by the way, when you tie anything to land, this is what also we learned from our research with Coalition for Peace in Africa. As soon as you tie things to land, then it goes very deep. Actually, Madima should say more about this. This is my own
yes,
hypothesis.
Please.
Amongst the Maori and other Pacifica institutions, like Pacifica ethnic groups like the Itauke in Fiji, they call land Whenua. Now, the Fijians say Vanua, which is a kind of almost very close to that. Whenua is the name of the land. But Whenua is also the name of the placenta. You and I know that in most of our communities, our mothers used to bury the placenta. That I was a witness of when I was a grandchild growing in Uranga. So that connection of being attached to the land, that you belong to the land, is so important amongst the communities in Oceania. In fact, some people even say we are land. When the Itauke, the Fijians are talking about, when they say the Vanua has agreed, I'm translating here, the Vanua has agreed, they say the people have agreed and the land has also agreed. You know? Mm. Now that's a much deeper understanding of land. When I was in the School of Education in KU, Professor Benaz and Joroge taught us that, you know, the word culture comes from the Latin verb cultus, which basically is to cultivate. To cultivate the land. That is the act of creating culture. So when people talk about, when Malema and the EFF and others talk about we need our land back, for me it is so significant because when you don't have your land, you are disconnected and you cannot then function optimally as a maker of culture. So the violence colonialism almost fossilized a good number of us. So we are not makers of culture. We don't see ourselves as makers of culture.
So where would you put the title deed in that relationship? Because I'm tired of that thing.
You know, I will not mention his name. He's now passed on. He's a great ancestor. So one time I was in one of these government buildings, and you know, after 5 o'clock, and we were wondering, you know, after so much of peace building work and research, and I asked this elder, I said, you've been on this earth for quite a while. If you could boil it down to one and say, this really is our problem in Kenya. What? And he looked at me and he said, title deed. Title deed. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's title deed. It's the way we kind of accepted the colonial definition of land, and the way we've been uprooted, dislocated from our land, and how that then makes us get stuck to certain narratives so that we don't function optimally as makers of culture. You know, the other day somebody was trying to ask me to break that down in a conversation I was having. And I asked the person, I said, you know, have you ever lived in a rental house where, you know, by every 5th of the month, you must have remitted your rent or else, you know? And she said, yes, for a very long time, she did. But of course, I knew where I was going with this because I know that she now owns her own place. And I say, if you look back in terms of your own outlook of life, when you're in a rental and now when you are in your own space. And she paused for a while and she said, yeah, there's a huge difference. When you are living in a rental, you can have your big ideas, you can have your dreams. You can even say, I want a different painting in this house, but you can't do it. The contract with the landlord or the landlady is very clear. We don't even need a nail on the wall without approval. So you get stuck. And she says, as soon as she moved to her own place, she can dream of making a different design. And that might even include knocking off a wall. And she can wake up the following morning and call a fundi, or she can take a hammer herself or a mallet and just knock it off. When you are standing on your own land, your outlook of life is very, very different. And that is why during the Coalition for Peace in Africa study, I sat at a place, they used to call it Burnt Forest. I don't know, they said they were changing the name. I don't know whether they have changed the name, but I was in a group discussion there with some people. And then during the break, this woman came to me and said, I didn't want to speak when we were in the group, but I want you to understand, Babu, there is nothing as painful as waking up in the morning and you have no plan. Hauna plan. She says, Babu, I used to wake up in the morning. I had plans. I had dreams. I could channel my energy in these things. Nowadays I'm here. I wake up in the morning. I have no plans. I even wait for people to bring me food. So if you are to extrapolate that, Mwalimu, that's where I think we are as the people in Kenya. We wake up in the morning, we have no plan. We just have to listen to the landlords who tell us in 2022, you need to do this. In 2022, you need to do this.
But just let me just ask, does title deed guarantee belonging? Because especially, you know, sometimes you're talking about title deeds in lands that were expropriated from other people. Other times you're talking about a lot of, you know, even when people have the title deeds, they're still evicted. You know, so does title deed guarantee your feet on the ground?
No. Oh, no. Not in our Kenya. And this I can tell you from stories I've heard from people very close to me. Not in our Kenya. I think there is a sense in which the whole idea that, you know, the title deeds were sacred, you know, I can't remember who said that, one of our ministers at a certain point, that no longer obtains. I think there is a sense in which we've created a structure where there are certain individuals who believe they can control ownership, basically, of the entire country. And they wanted to mortgage it, they can do it. I've had so many cases where people have title deeds and it really means nothing. When people want your land, well, they do it the way the mafia do it. If you watch God 1, 2, and 3, you know, they'll get it if they want it. And added to that, of course, is that the title deed also is a system really of exclusion. Because individual titles, these really disenfranchise so many people, especially for people, you know, to whom land was communally owned. And they knew this is a resource that we should share. It should give us bread. It connects us to our history and our ancestors. It's something we can pass on to the next generation. These are really tough questions that people are facing now. I was doing a consultancy for some other agency in Turkana. I think this was a year or so ago. And you see even the way we deal with what you might call common resources like oil or aquifers in Turkana and so on and so forth. And the way people just disorganize or organize elders and people and get access and control and use of land with very little compensation, and even you know, consultation with the owners of the land. I mean, I've never visited any place on this earth where, you know, people did not have a story of association of that land as a gift from the ancestors or creator or whatever else we want to call it. It's always there. So individual titles, Mwalimu, that's a big issue for us. And I'm sure it's going to be an issue for the years to come.
Okay, I'd like us to move to the court system because that is mentioned also in the report. The idea of justice as establishment of guilt or innocence. Maybe you can tell us about why that does not work for the kind of society and the human issues that we are dealing with in Kenya.
Okay, to give us a kind of short answer to that, the Tanzanian Catholic priest, Father Laurenti Magesa, wrote a very interesting book that came out in 1997. He titled it African Religion, The Moral Traditions of Abundant Life. And one of the arguments he makes there is, in the process, in a judicial process or in a conflict resolution process, what were indigenous Africans hoping to achieve? Something has happened between 2-3 parties. So if the elders come together or the seers or whoever was called upon to help us in resolving the conflict, what was the vision? What were they really trying to achieve? And according to Magesa, he says, one, of course, is redress. 2 would be compensation. But he says, more importantly, it was the healing of the relationships. Because our ancestors recognized that when there is a conflict between Mwalimu Wandia and Babu, it's not just about the two of them. They have relatives, they have children, they have friends. Their argument and their fighting has injured more people than 2. And probably, if it was even more serious, even the ancestors are annoyed. And fight the land as well. So that intricate relationship between Wandia and Babu, their relations, the land, the ancestors, the creator, according to Father Magesa, the judicial process was supposed to bring us back to a balance of those relationships. Now, if you come to our typical court system, I don't know whether Mwalimu, you've ever attended a court case where it's a rape case. In my younger days, when I was growing up in the Eastlands, when schools closed, one of my pastimes was really just to go to Makadara law courts. My idea was just to go into court, sit down there at the back and just listen. And when you're in a court and it's a rape case, you really ask yourself, who really is on trial? Who really is on trial here? Because the girl or the woman will be asked the kind of questions that an African ear cannot just process. But a typical court system would do that. Then in most cases, I don't know whether magistrates or judges even give a chance to the girl or the woman to say a little bit of her story. It becomes the rule of evidence, the mechanics of the law. When those two people come out, there's almost no chance of restoring relationships. And whatever happened about their own networks of relationships, nobody bothers. Who worries about what the ancestors think about that offense, that criminal act? So that's basically the point, that when we emphasize, and I'm not saying abolish it, but when we look at things through the judicial system only, we lose so much in our efforts to bring about peace and justice in a society. I do know in my younger days when I worked with a project in Wajir, Mandera, what we used to call the Somali cluster, Garissa. Someone would commit an offense in a community, they would be jailed for 2-3 years. And then when they come back to the community, the elders again assemble and they said, unajua sasa wewe umemaliza ile justice ya serikali. Sasa lazima urudi tufanye justice ya jamii. And there will be fines and compensation and all these processes and so on, and even rituals would happen. So my sense has been, we have overemphasized the court system. Well, let's give credit where it's due. Our current constitution provides for what the framers termed alternative dispute resolution. So for example, if you went to court and you told a judge that, you found that there's another way you could resolve the issue, in theory, the judge can agree and then you will deposit the agreement with the court or something like that. And I do know for a fact that when Willie Mutunga was Chief Justice, he really tried to promote what he called the alternative dispute resolution system, because he recognized that it was creating more conflict within families, clans, and our entire society than really helping us amplify our agency in resolving conflicts in a long-term version.
But some people might say that, for example, in the case of a rape victim, it means that it will happen, it's encouraging more violence against women. I don't know, how would you respond to that?
You mean the judicial system encourages? Is that?
No, the alternative, the community resolution framework, that it endorses more violence against women.
Yes, and to be honest, that has really been a huge question for those who talk about restorative justice. That yes, justice through the judicial system, or what we call our criminal justice system, is important, but it does not address certain issues. Now, to give you a typical example, it used to happen in one of the communities I was working with as a peace worker, where in a rape case, they would actually gather, and sometimes even without the presence of the girl, and they would kind of adjudicate, the criminal offense. And they would say, okay, the rapist should, offer this and give this and so on and so forth. And this was a huge discussion. I know for a fact that the Council of Elders, in the location where I was, working and supporting the peace process, they said there are certain criminal offenses that go beyond what they call either the capacity or the vision of the elders. Those we need to involve the criminal justice system. Because even when we are talking about the rule of evidence, the Council of Elders cannot deal with that to really be able to establish really what happened and so on and so forth. The question was, is there a way both systems of justice can actually dialogue, have a conversation, so that we get the best of the two, so that when this boy or man is sent to prison, we are also very clear about the things that he will have to do when he returns, and his family will have to do, when they return. It was a dilemma, and I can tell you even up to now, as a researcher and a practitioner, I don't have like a kind of a one clear-cut answer. I've always thought I will work with what the context tells me, because some people have told me, Babu, this is the best way to resolve this issue. So even with my own lenses or having grown in Nairobi and all these things, it becomes very difficult. But yes, it's an important paradox or dilemma, if I can frame it that way.
And I think going back to what you were saying about women and the life force and the respect of the recognition that violence against women is a spiritual violence against a community. I think we need to be reminded of it. It's there in our cultures, but it has been forgotten, or we have been blinded to it by the colonial state. So in fact, even sometimes when I remind people, but our culture, for example, the Kikuyu clans, one girl was removed because she's the one who didn't get married. And that's a psychic violence that nobody, I mean, these days when you point it out, especially to the men with state power and, money, they really resent you pointing that out. So I think there's a kernel, there are some seeds in each culture, each African culture, at least that's what Chekan Diop says, that African cultures had that seed in which we recognize that violence against women is violence against life, violence against the community. But I think it's something that we need to bring it back, because I think if that was made more conscious to communities, then they would adjudicate some of these cases a little differently. I think also a lot of times people are scared of the police coming to arrest somebody. So even when they're adjudicating to prevent going to the police. Yeah. So I think there's also the specter of state violence that makes people want to redress issues rather than a restoration of our ties to each other and to the land.
Yeah, and so, Mwalimu, if I may add on the question of culture, 2 quick points. I think there is a sense in which when we speak about culture, people tend to think about frozen things, things in a museum, so that you and I, this generation, we are not seen as makers of culture. So if I talk about local, someone wants to take me back, I don't know to where. So I think we need to always, I try to do that with my children, I try to do that with the people, my students all over. We are makers of culture, which means like our ancestors, we make adjustments, we borrow, we sometimes even steal, we adapt, and so on and so forth. I mean, I sat with my grandfather for days. And I would ask him, how did we do this when we were, our clans had just crossed from Uganda and settled in Karachuonyo? And he would tell me, this is how we did it. And when we moved and we settled at another place, things changed. Even the number of cows in the dowry went down. When we came and settled in Maseno and our people interacted more with the Luyas, some of our traditions in game are very Bantu. So if I go amongst the Banyore people, there are certain things I'll say and even do in the language, and they'll be able to recognize that. As a result of that, many years of their interaction and stay, with the Bantu people. So I just wanted to, I always try to emphasize this so that people don't feel, culture is kind of frozen and, we are not makers of culture. We are, so we should be able to change that. Then the second thing I want to say very quickly, in peace and conflict studies, we also believe no culture is entirely violent. No entirely peaceful. Now I'm talking from a peace studies perspective. So we always say in each culture, you will find a peace culture. And there's a culture that will promote violence. So what our ancestors struggled with was to do less of that culture, as Magesa says, that does not promote life and promote it abundantly. And we keep on amplifying the peace culture, hopefully to a level where when we pass it to the next generation, like the song of the Maori, people just get the message. They don't have to repeat, the violent things, that happen. So that's also where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, Sheikh Anta Diop says that. Although he used the what do you call it? He used the metaphors of matriarchy and patriarchy. And he said that patriarchy is the culture of adventure and risk-taking, and the one that is likely to be more violent. And then there's the matriarchy, which is the culture of care and taking care of the earth, taking care of people. And he wasn't saying that it's men and women. He was saying it's two philosophical cultures. So both participate in both cultures. So that's what he was saying, that we need to keep what has happened with colonialism is the suppression of the care side, side of our cultures, and the violent one is amplified. So that then now when people say in our cultures, they're picking the violent one and forgetting that there was also a care side, and that these two were always in contention, and society was always having to balance the two. And I like what you're saying about we are creators of culture. I think that's one of the biggest issues we have, because I mean, we are not, like now for me, and I feel so sad that I'm discovering this when I'm at this age, that there are so many things Kenyans have been doing, but they haven't been recorded, like you are saying. So we haven't integrated them into our library and our memory. So people are still talking about things of the 1920s that are so distorted, and we are not able to integrate what happened in the 40s, in the 60s, in the 80s, 2000s. That there's a gap there, and that continuity is not being honored because of this idea of culture being static. So we are not recognizing all that we have been creating culture all along, but we are not honoring it, we are not remembering it, and we are not archiving it. Yeah. Hey, so, gosh, this has been such a deep discussion. I'd like to ask you to end with, I don't like doing solutionism because it sounds so sterile. But maybe towards the path of healing, what do we need to do? You mentioned, the report mentions the weaknesses of the TJRC, but I felt that a lot of what was in the report was more of an institutional response. So for us Kenyans and people, what should we be thinking about? What should we be looking out for and aspiring for? And maybe as citizens later on be able to ask for?
Yeah, that's an important question. Sometimes when I look back at what was happening in 2007 and 8, I was in Kisumu, and through the media, I had to rely on TV quite a bit. I don't like watching TV much. So I saw different groups of Kenyans either holding demonstrations or holding meetings in support of whatever side. And one of the things I noticed that even when a group of young people would gather in Kondele, or some elders would meet somewhere in Nairobi, or women leaders would be hiding somewhere to seek a solution for the challenges we were experiencing, they began by singing the first stanza of our national anthem. And this was very interesting to watch, because these are people from different sides, political divides, but they have one thing in common: the national anthem, particularly the first stanza. And when I was conducting workshops then, or teaching thereafter, I began reflecting with people the deep meaning of those words. Mwalimu, what did the founding mothers and the founding fathers of this nation have in mind, early 60s, wherever, and have that sort of captured in very few artistic words? My hypothesis is, Frantz Fanon says each generation, has a responsibility. They can either, achieve it or whatever. We must rise out of relative, obscurity, as he puts it. But also, just shortly afterwards, I think the following sentence, also Frantz Fanon reminds us that those who were there before us, and I'm paraphrasing here, those who were there before us did what they could with the tools that they had, and so forth. And I'm thinking that it is our generation, Mwalimu Wandia, that has failed to make culture. It is us. We were the people who came before us in 1963. They may have made their mistakes, of course, but when they were passing on the baton, it seems to me that a good number of those people in the leadership, whether they were compromised in Lancaster or whatever happens, they had a very clear vision of the kind of country Kenya ought to be. It was very clear. And they made sure it was documented in the national anthem. And when you ask that question, I always tell myself, this is where I like going back to. I like going back to a place where I know that I am standing on the shoulders of giants. They had a very clear dream. And I do not know about you, Mwalimu, there's a certain moment as I was growing up, I could see that dream being manifested. I grew up in the Eastlands. My father was a postal messenger. So if you see the General Post Office, which is now Huduma headquarters number, my father was based there. And I can still remember my father telling me time and again, Babu, I'm a messenger. I have seen so many people come and just pass through my hand. I would even train them, do this job. But a year or later, they'd be promoted. And you'd say, Babu, one thing I know, sina shamba. Of course, my father has a lot of shamba, but he used to tell me, Babu, sina shamba. shamba yako ni shule. Weka effort. Go to school. We might not give you the best of meals, but study hard. And my father, who did not know how to read and write, would even come home sometimes and take my book and actually pretend that he was actually checking my homework. You know, as an adolescent, I could tell, mzee ananichezea tu. But you know, when you look back, you saw a father who had a dream and he believed it was possible. And as a child, I believed it was possible that if I worked hard, if I did my best, even when I was being chased, school fees, unaenda nyumbani, wamekufukuza, where Rudy, waambie baba atakuja kesho. He doesn't show up, but you just go back to school. There was a time that belief was so strong, and I saw it with other people of my generation. For example, if I might drop some names, Bernard Otieno of Super Sports Multi-Choice. Yeah. We grew up in, we had that belief. And our parents had that belief. And we ended up making it to the university. And we could see our lives changing. I mean, I remember getting my TSC posting before I completed my last semester at KU. I was already had a job. I was posted. And I still can remember the day I went to my father and I said, you know what? I've got this number of points. It's above the cutoff. I'm heading to the university. My father never used to, I can't recall my father ever hugging me when I was a boy, a child. I think that's the first time my father hugged me like nothing else. And he walked me around that Huduma number GPO place, introducing me to everyone. And you could see the sense of pride. So now, Mwalimu, I'm asking myself, I have 3 boys. I cannot share with them that story, that passion. And even if I did, I don't think they would believe me when I tell them, study hard, you know, do this. So it is that, it's what Chris Hedges called the breakdown of these social bonds. So we no longer have this shared belief encapsulated in our national anthem. We no longer share it, that all of us have an equal chance and that we can draw energy from each other, from the community. I don't know, Mwalimu, about your growing up. Me, I know in post-Ambotela, if I did not go to school, ene mzazi akiniona na randa mtaani, they will question, Babu mbona huko shule? Where I live now, I cannot ask anybody's child, why are you not in school? Point I'm trying to make is, we have the blueprint, Mwalimu. It's there. Forget, constitutions are important, 2010, but the software of building this nation, where justice will be our shield and defender, it's there. And that will dwell in unity. And not even that plenty will be found within our borders. What a dream we were given. So that question just brings me back to that, and I say, the dream is there. All you need to do is to make those spiritual journey backwards. 1 step, 2 steps backwards so that you can actually go ahead. This whole idea of rushing ahead, we are rushing ahead, we are moving on. Bila hiyo software, we'll find ourselves just going into these cycles. That is kind of my short answer to your question.
So, Babu Ayindo, you're like my counselor. You have been my counselor today. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And I hope the people who listen to it will draw as much strength from what you have said that I have. So I'd like you to finish for us with either a blessing or a story, something to to leave us with, so that people, when they remember you 10 years from now, they say, that story. But just anyway, either a blessing or a story or something to leave us with.
Okay. You've ambushed me, you know that, right?
Yes, yes. I'm sorry, I should have thought, I should have reminded you. Okay.
I want to share just a small encounter I had with my grandmother. It's an encounter that inspires me to date. You know, my father's idea of, making me into a good citizen was that as soon as schools closed, and he knew I was very close to my grandparents, he would put me on a train. This was a long journey, almost like 17 hours, to Kisumu, and then you take the locomotive train, to Luanda. This locomotive train used to go up to Butere, but I drop off in Luanda. And my grandmother would pick me up from there. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. But as an adolescent, you begin noticing certain patterns. So I would usually go to the village in April, August, and December. Now, because we have two rainy seasons, it means that by the time I get to the village in April, people have just, I think people have just harvested, and then they're preparing now the land again for the next round of planting. And it's tough work. Farm work is tough work. And I do know many times, my grandmother would wake me up at 5 a.m. First, second, third cockroach, you are up. And a little something like breakfast, and off you go to the fields to work. So you go. By the time you leave, it's end of April, early May. You come back in August. When you come back in August, guys have already harvested the maize, and now they have started the next round of preparing the fields. Yeah. So me, I noticed there's something unfair here. Something unfair. So one time, my grandmother wakes me up early in the morning and says, let's go over. So we would cross a river. Our land is a game. We have a lot of valleys, interlocking valleys. So we would cross this river and then go up, and then we had a field on the other side of the valley. So that morning, as an adolescent, and mjuaji wa Nairobi, decide to find ways to avoid going to till the land. So, you begin with, I'm not feeling well. I have a little headache. Oh, you have a little headache, my grandchild. So should go, pick something, maybe some herbs, come and rub and say, no, you'll be okay, let's go. An excuse here, it doesn't work. My grandmother would always have a solution. A little complaint there, she takes, a calabash and her basket, you have a banana there, you sit there, eat, and then take your djembe and just continue. But, you can imagine as a young person who lives in Nairobi, and, you come to Nairobi with your hands with blisters, and people make fun of you, when you go back to school. I thought, no, this needs to stop. Why don't I just confront my grandmother head on and say, look, I really don't feel like working. So we were in this farm tilling, and I remember that episode so clearly. So we are tilling the land, and then I give some excuse, and then, she encourages me. Then I say, Dana, in Doluo, you call your grandmother Dana. I said, Dana. So I'm translating here. I said, look, I work hard. I mean, I come here April, August, December. And when I come back here, what happens? You guys have already eaten the food, and I only find the dry maize, because those days we used to have like a dero, a storage where you put the dry maize. And by the way, nowadays in Luoland, there's no dero, no storage in the village. So I say I would only find the dry maize. And you know, as adolescents, we love the fresh maize for roasting and so on. So I said, this is unfair. I work and other people eat. I work and other people eat. So I remember my grandmother, you know, she looked up at me. And, you know, my grandmother loved me deeply. But I also knew that if she called you a certain name, then she was really upset. And then she, you know, she looked up, she looked at me, and she called me a name that really nobody calls me. You know, in the village, you have several names. And she told me, you know, if you are tilling this land so that you will eat, take your bag, take your water, whatever, calabash, gourd, go back home. So, you know, I said, but why? I'm just asking, it's unfair. She said, no. Just go back. If that's your attitude, I'm paraphrasing here. She was speaking to me in Doluo. She said, we don't till the land because of that. So you go. So, you know, I went back home. And, you know, when this comes from somebody you really love and your grandmother, it has a totally different impact. You know, if it's your parent, you know, hey, these are battles I'm used to. So when I was crossing the river, I took a pause there. And I was washing my face and I'm wondering, do I go back or do I just go home? So I drink the water from the river and I said, you know, let me go home. So I went home. My grandmother came in the afternoon and she didn't discuss it much. She just went about preparing some food for us or something. You know, after eating, I remember that evening, just before I went to sleep, she asked me, are you waking up tomorrow morning to go and till the land? And I said, yes, I think I'll join you tomorrow. And then my grandmother said, you know, till the land so that those who will be alive then will have food. I didn't quite understand, you know, that's a really philosophical statement, but I didn't understand what Dana was talking about. If you want to till the land so that you eat the next time you are here, don't come. If you want to till the land so that those who will be alive when the maize, you know, the beans are ready, the vegetables, tomorrow morning, join me again. And I joined my grandmother the following morning, begrudgingly, of course, but I did not quite understand. Still, you know, I'm struggling with these thoughts. So then my grandmother passes on. And when she passed on, I remember, because I like taking pictures, I had a camera that day. So, you know, after all the funeral rites and the burial rites, her casket is lowered, you know, down as it goes 6 feet under, and I'm taking pictures. You know, those days you used to take pictures, then you take it to a studio, when they were all shared, and then they come back. So when the photos come back, that's when I notice. I know this time, you know, I'm at the university. That's when I noticed that as the casket was being lowered, we were burying her in a place where it was surrounded by maize stalks that she had planted. She was saying to me in that photo, till the land so that those who will be alive then will have food. And that for me has so much influence what I do, my practice in peace building, the way I do storytelling, the way I engage with things, because I know, don't do it for you. If you do it for you, you've lost the plot. Our founding mothers and our founding grandfathers did not do it for themselves. They knew another generation is coming. And I think that is a calling for all of us. Whatever we do now, let's think about the next generation and the next generation. Ni hayo tu mwalimu.
Babu Ayindo, thank you so much. This has been such a blessing. And I really hope that even the rest of the audience will be blessed by this conversation.